session of the Board of Education and the Board of Finance for the purpose of review of the proposed 2019-2020 operating budget.
Can I call the Board of Finance to order?
Please.
The Board of Finance called to order.
Great. I want to thank members of the Board of Finance for what I know has been your very thorough and detailed review of our budget so far, and for submitting to us what I thought were really great questions, and questions that I think are on the minds of a lot of members of the community. So we look forward to a good discussion tonight.
Yeah, thank you for meeting with us, and also thank you for the presentation Monday night. That was very helpful. As usual, there are major financial issues facing the town of Wilton, including the decline of the grand list and the potential mill rate rise to offset that, the continued reduction of state aid to Wilton, both in education and municipal grants, state effort to get Wilton to contribute a portion of the teacher's pension shortfall, and also, last but not least, school consolidation bills being introduced in Hartford. None of those have a positive impact on town's finances, but are not what we're here to talk about tonight. So we're not going to have that as part of the discussion. There's nothing we can do about it tonight. Probably won't affect this year's budget, so that's basically excluded from tonight's discussion. And we thank the BOE for submitting an FY20 budget below our guidelines. And we have submitted questions in advance. That looks like you've already done some preparations on that. Before we get started, I want to read a letter from the Ridgefield Press from a couple weeks ago. And it's titled, "Wilton versus Ridgefield School Budgets and Taxes." You're smiling. Have you read this one? Okay. Well, I'll read it for the other people. The Wilton and Ridgefield have wonderful school systems and high schools that rank in the top 10 within all Wilton towns. Wilton's proposed budget increase for next year is only 1.3%, while Ridgefield's increase is 3.43%. The difference is actually huge, and the impact extends to the overall viability of our town. In Ridgefield's case, if this rate continues over the years, the school budget will double in 21 years. Wilton's doubling scenario is a much more reasonable at 53 years. Hard to imagine my property tax in 10 years, let alone doubling in 20. Devastating. I know the Ridgefield Board of Education loves math, so please go back and make the tough decisions necessary. In 10 years, no one will be able to afford Ridgefield property taxes, and all future home buyers will have a great incentive to buy in Wilton. Ridgefield must lower proposed taxes to stay competitive with Wilton. Rich Fasanatelli, Gay Road, January 17th. That's why we focus on it. And even in Ridgefield, we're starting to see the impact of our trying to maintain the line, and Ridgefield's taking notice of it. And so, as an intro, that's what we're here tonight to talk about. So I'll turn it over to you. We've submitted a bunch of questions. Some of them were redundant. I wanted to see that several members raised the same concerns, so you can see that some of those have greater emphasis. And looks like you've prepared, so why don't we go through those, and then we can have some general discussion if there are any other ones that remain.
Great. So we'll go right in order, and then I'll start, and we'll have, where appropriate, Anne and Andrea pick up. Some of these are straightforward. So the first question was a question about salaries being up 3.8%, which is a large increase given declining enrollment. What are we doing to reduce, not increase headcount as enrollment continues to decline? So as you're probably already aware, the majority of that increase is really driven contractually. I'd say that both the WEA, that's our teacher's contract, and the WASA, that's our administrator's contract, expire June 30, 2020. So we'll be commencing negotiations for successor agreements beginning next year. So in answer to your question, that'll be one of the first opportunities we have to try to address costs.
Next year, meaning this August, or
so we typically go into negotiations in the fall. Mm-hmm. So we'll have it set for 2021.
Okay.
Right. Also, within that increase is $590,000 in new spending for staff we're proposing to add. Again, as you know, the majority of that group is either associated with the proposed alternative school program or with the Community Steps program. And I think both of those are interesting because what we're trying to do and what we've done with the establishment of the Community Steps program is create opportunities in town to educate kids at half the cost or less of what it would cost to send them out of town. And so there was a question that I'll ask Andre to dig into a little later on. So when we talk about what are we doing, those are the kinds of things that we're doing. And I would just ask the Board of Finance to consider, as we've asked the Board of Ed to consider, the way that we examine staffing. So we have, as you know, classroom teachers who are probably most enrollment sensitive, but when you look across the grade continuum, they're most sensitive at Cider Mill and Middle School, Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll, because as the enrollment decreases, you can go down a class. It's also fairly sensitive at the high school because we enroll to the section there, so we can collapse sections, reduce partial FTE, et cetera. It is less sensitive at the middle school because the middle school is team-based. So later on this month, Lauren Feltz, the middle school principal, and I will be convening a committee of middle school staff, and we're going to go through the enrollment change. We also have some concerns on the table around instructional time in mathematics, and so we're going to work with the staff to generate some proposals about how we might combat and achieve, maybe a headcount savings, but also some additional instructional time.
Kevin, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by team-based?
Sure. So in a middle school model, there's this understanding that at that developmental age, students need to be in environments where they are pretty closely connected to one or more adults. And so the way that we organize is what they call a team. So we'll take a group of kids. So imagine kind of making a school within a school, if you will. So we take a group of kids and we assign them to a small group of teachers. So in the instance of Middlebrook, you'll have maybe 100, 110 students assigned to a reading teacher, a writing teacher, a math teacher, a science teacher, a social studies teacher, a world language teacher. And those kids for the day, that's who they interact with. And then that team-based approach also allows for multidisciplinary projects, allows for team building exercise in the group. And the thinking and the theory behind that is you create those kind of small, intimate situations where kids not only bond and connect with each other, but they also develop those safe bonded relationships with staff. And it's psychologically safer than dropping kids in, say, kind of a mini high school model where they're transitioning across 7 periods, 7 different teachers in large groups with lots of kids that they don't necessarily interface with period after period.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Is there any concern about having middle schoolers and high schoolers together, even though they're in that small team-based?
So we
talking
don't currently have
alternative?
that program at the alternative school program.
Right, you're not talking about the alternative.
No,
Sorry.
but just to answer the question, no, we don't have concern about that. And the way that the staff are proposing to structure the day academically, the middle school age kids would be with each other. The high school kids would be
So
separated.
they're not going to be working across the different.
Not all day long. There
ages.
might be opportunities for projects where they do, work together, but those would be structured and planned, very carefully by the staff.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking for it. Sorry. I spent 7 hours with the state legislature in Hartford today, and it was just pain. I'm in pain. I'm still, even after an hour and a half car ride, I'm still in pain. Sorry, Anne, do you want to take number 2?
Number
please?
2?
Yeah.
So as you can see from the detail, and we know from the town side, the OPEB has come in very strong with its valuation and the extra contribution that we make, plus the pension. So the ARCs have come down lower. So we do have that significant saving in that line, that 200 plus that 250,000. The other side is medical. So our medical, we had, in this particular, it's 800,000 that we're reducing. In the medical, we have 3 employees that retired out because we were, as you know, we outsource the IT, which gives us a bigger range of ability and skill set to be able to move those people around versus what we had. So part of this savings is actually taken up in the IT budget. It's about 100,000 for those 3 positions. The remaining balance, why it's coming down, is if you remember last year, there's a couple of different things for this. Last year, if you remember the rates that came in, we're 14% and 10% between the PPO and the HSA. When we're setting our budget on the Board of Ed side, it's set before we can get those final rates that the town has the ability to get in March or April. So those rates are set for us at that point, which is what our budget is set at. Now, it doesn't always come in at that level, but compounded with, we're not on a system, as you know, that puts it by department and by person. So we're allocating based on estimates of, here's all our employee bases, and we set it at, they're a family, they're a single, whatever the case. But if people move within the year, that change doesn't happen in the budget, because we shift over a quarter of the cost every quarter. And that's what the town was doing until we moved, when we got out of ADP up until New World, and that's what's going to change when we go from Ceridian to New World. We'll actually be able to schedule it by person, and then as that person changes, or a person retires that had a family and a person comes into a single, we'll start realizing those savings in the actual budget versus you're building the reserve because that's what we're putting over. So I'm doing similar to the OPEB and the pension. I'm smoothing out because it built, the reserve we have healthy at the 1.7 is there. That has been recommended by the broker, that the Board of Ed keep as a reserve. And the town side, I believe, is 7, it's 1.7 on the Board of Ed. So we hadn't had to tap into that reserve because of having the stop loss. We've unfortunately had some significant claims on both sides and have not touched that claim. So we're safe on that. But because of last year and the year before, because of that rates and because of those savings can't be kept in here, there was $400,000 or $500,000 built up in there that I'm smoothing over to bring it over the next couple of years because the rates were just too high.
I think
questions
all
on it.
5 of us, 6 of us are still concerned about this, because if this spikes for some reason, and there are other concerns that are going to come into this budget that Jeff just mentioned, pension concerns that we'll probably talk about later. Going forward, do you really think that this is a good number?
Yep, I do. Going forward, because then we're going to build off this going forward as well, because the rates are coming in as the high rates right now. At PPO is 6%, HSA is 8%. So that's the high conservative one right now, which we know that's going to come down once those final allocation rates, because they do that 12-month look back. And the Board of Ed's claims right now are significantly less than last year. So, and as they go, when they give us the allocation rates, they're looking at it as January back or December back. And what happens, what we're finding is typically in November, December is when that stop loss kicks in. So our current one includes our stop loss claims in our claims rating. And it really shouldn't be, but they are putting it in there. Most companies don't do that. So that's when we start hitting it, so it spikes up at that point. But then as each month goes down, those ones are dropping off from the year before, so we start going lower again, and that's why those rates come down by the time we put the actual allocation rates in for the final one.
So is the basic correlation then between claims and premiums?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you feel that the claims, you know, you're projecting claims to be no worse than?
Without getting into too much detail on the
Yeah, no,
claims,
I
I
know,
don't.
but it's
Barring a
that's a
catastrophic,
variability.
which we've had some pretty, serious claims, and we still haven't touched the reserve. So if you had to tap in because of a spike for some reason and you wanted to touch the reserves, you could, to even it out for another year, because it's every year it's going to change based on where that 12-month claims rating is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be, so you're protected against that reserve to build it up. But we don't want to obviously build up too much of a reserve because of what happened last year with those rates were so high at the beginning, 14 and 10. But once we get onto the New World the HR payroll side of things, you're actually capturing the true budget expense of each person, not as a group. Because right now, every quarter I'm putting over $2 million over to the fund. That's how we work it right now. The expenditures come out of the healthcare fund, and then the general funds fund over the revenue.
So the healthcare insurers give you credit for being able to have that granularity, is
Yes.
what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So I am very comfortable, and I think it's just, I don't want to build, we shouldn't be building up a big reserve, and because of what happened last year, it's not appropriate. And just the fact that the high rates are coming in at 8, and I know they're gonna come down lower.
Again, the 1.7 million reserve is on the $8 million annual cost?
No, we have a healthcare fund that we set up, an active healthcare fund, where to keep the fluctuation out of the general fund, it's in this other fund.
What else does it cover? Does it only cover the?
Oh, medical, dental,
Mhm.
what's over there as well? Medical, dental, and then we have our flex
So
plan.
as a percentage of your annual cost, it's about what percent?
The reserve, you
Yeah.
said? I'd have to think about, well, the 1.3, so what's that?
Divided by
20, yeah. it-
So it's fairly large.
Yeah, yeah. And that was through the brokers. They did a full analysis between the town side and the board saying, based on our claims, based on our size, what's an appropriate reserve to keep on the, in the active healthcare fund? And those are the reserves that we watch. Both on the town side too, we do, the same thing, we watch to make sure that they don't build.
So not to spend too much more time, but the driver in the past have been unusual claims in the population. Unexpected, catastrophic, some type of catastrophic claims that came in.
No, well, I think prior to we went, so from what I see, it started in 2011 that we started the active healthcare fund, is when we started that fund to stop the fluctuation here. So we budgeted here, and then the active healthcare fund builds up either the reserve or the deficit, and then this would clear it, that you could smooth it over to build it back up if you want. But like I said, for I've been here, the 3 years I've been here, and I see the claims on both sides, we've never touched the reserve. We've been very fortunate that between our stop loss and our regular insurance, we've been able to cover it. But if a spike, as you said, which would have to be, to me right now, truly catastrophic, to touch that reserve right now. So it's a healthy position.
And the reserve is 1.7, you said?
It's
For
just a little bit over
school
2
and
right
the
now
town, or
because
just
it,
the schools?
just the schools,
Okay.
yeah.
And maybe just on the OPEB side. That side is likely not going to continue to occur period over period it's based upon partially on the performance of the OPEB fund.
Right.
Which has done very well in an upmarket and will not do so
And
well.
they smooth as well, so their
Yeah.
gains and losses, even
Yes.
though.
So we have a
they're-
few more years of that.
Yeah,
smooth
we're
out,
hundred and
a couple
two
more years.
percent
Yeah.
funded right
Mhm.
now, and I think with the next, because we only do the revaluation every 2 years, that's all you're required to do
Yeah.
on the OPEB. When we do the next one, which is now, I'd be surprised if it doesn't come lower or closer to zero, because it's 102 right now, and that's based on July 1st, 2016, I believe. So that's 2 years ago, which was probably $2 to $3 million difference in the valuation of the fund.
Can we just get a 2017 update, or is that just for the pension fund?
You got what's called the GASB rule, and that's just bringing it forward without doing the full census data. So the full census data actually changes that for us, and then we changed the mortality rates and things like that, so they changed it slightly, so, but that's what the update you just got was just GASB rules for the audit.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry, so we're at 96, you're saying the actuals at 102? We're
We're
about,
funded about 102%
Right.
on the OPEB, and we're about 98 on the pension.
but I'm sorry, so the 102 is at market value, or the 102 is the accounting calculation that drives this budget?
It drives this budget. They do their ARC based on that, and they're saying we're 100, but remember, this is 2 years ago. So even though it's now, they're basing this ARC based on what the valuation and the census was as of October 1st,
Okay.
2016.
So the third question was kind of a follow-on to that question, if there was, should we have held off with proposed staffing increases? You heard what I heard, so I have a lot of reason to feel safe and comfortable with the number in that healthcare line. So we feel like the investments we're making in staffing today are wise investments, and we'd hope to see a return on those, particularly with the job coaches and community steps, because that program is expanding, as well as the alternative school programming. The kindergarten teacher we're proposing to add is really an adjustment based on enrollment to keep class sizes at an average of about 19. So I feel good with those staffing. I think we're also, even with the additions, we're still below 16-17 levels. Moving on to question 4, in terms of cost reduction programs, we look fairly intensively across all budget areas. The majority of our budget is staffing and benefits, so major cost reductions would come out of staffing. The opportunities that I see in the next several years I don't see staffing opportunities necessarily at Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill in terms of classroom staffing. We've talked about with the Board of Ed over the last year, with the new administration at Miller Driscoll, with a different focus around the area of special services. We're writing very different IEPs today at that school with, I think, more streamlined services. So the bet there is that as those children of those IEPs flow through the system, we'll be able to adjust accordingly as they move through Sutter Mill, Middlebrook, and the high school. And we may find ourselves in a situation where we actually require less special services staffing. Similarly, in looking at enrollment in the out years, the two lower schools look to be, fairly stable at the moment. We'll see about a 100-student drop at Middlebrook, which we may be able to address with the committee I mentioned earlier. And then we'll see a similar decrease somewhere beginning around 2023 at the high school. And given the fact that we staff to the section, I would expect we would make some staffing modifications at that point. In terms of other cost savings or cost reduction programs, you probably know as much as I do about some of the energy conservation programs that Wilton has really led around the state, but certainly to the benefit of the school's budget and the town budget. And then we are, I think, an emerging leader in this understanding of shared services and the potential for shared services, at least within town entities.
Let me quickly interject.
Sure.
I should have put that in the upfront comments. Thank you very much for cooperating with the town. We are a leader in Connecticut of sharing services, and I should have put it up front. Can't thank you guys enough for cooperating with the town and sharing Ann and Chris Burney and other resources of the town. It's enormously helpful, and I hear it's going very well.
It is going very well.
One other question, you had mentioned some of the costs associated with utilities. One of the line items I did see that got put in here was, on a percentage basis, pretty big increase for fuel cost for the busing. And just given where energy costs are, I just couldn't reconcile that.
Chris
So it
we
hasn't come
asked
down
Chris,
with,
because that question came up among the board, and he went back and said, based on kind of where we were and when we locked in the last contract, he thought 6% was about the right number.
That's what he said that we're currently paying market price for the diesel, but, which is substantially higher than our previous rate, but it's still, so he's very comfortable with the rate he put in for where we are.
Yeah,
So the benefit of a previous lot, it makes it look like a large increase, not really year over year.
Right.
Not an increase per se.
Right.
Thanks.
Question number 5 was around the Object 3000 line. Professional services gone up 50% over the past 3 years, 4 to 5.9 million. Why the increase? So the majority of this is due to an increase in technology, and really the primary driver there is our Novus contract. So one of the substantial changes we made in the district was to outsource our back-end IT. And I think over the course of several years, we picked up somewhere around kind of over 3 or 4 years, maybe $1 million in savings, because we, as personnel cycled out, we folded. If we needed replacement personnel, we folded them into the contract. We also got 24/7 service as opposed to more traditional 35-hour week service. But we've just grown that contract, and so that's where you see the increase. Next to that, our Power School is our primary student database, and so the costs around Power School, and then purchasing associated databases. So Talent Ed is our teacher evaluation program, and then we pay for some consulting services. Those also, they lived in different parts of the budget, so they weren't necessarily a new cost. We just brought them in and centralized them under one line. And then the other real driver on that line is the increase in cost of independent educational evaluations. And that's as a result of a special education law here in Connecticut. Parents that ask for IEs give the district the choice of either granting them or filing immediately for a due process hearing. So,
The federal law.
excuse me, federal law.
IDEA grants parents the right to request an independent educational evaluation at public expense. And when asked, we have 2 choices. Yes, or no and file for an immediate due process hearing, which will likely cost more than the evaluation would cost. But we work with the families and try to limit the requests in terms of doing good evaluations on our end, which we do. But still, the parents have that right, and so we have to respond accordingly. And a typical independent evaluation costs between $5,000 and $7,000. So $86,000 is about the number we're giving. You also, in this line, it's the independent educational evaluation also includes psychiatric evaluations. We do not have a staff psychiatrist, so any evaluation, when we have to seek a psychiatric evaluation, is done by an outside agency, and that typically, or an outside psychiatrist, and that typically is about an $8,000 per cost.
Andre, do you want to take the, question 6 is really the alternative school program?
Okay, so I attempted to respond to the questions regarding the alternative school and the program. Really, this is a cost avoidance strategy. This bringing students or maintaining students in district and providing the services here rather than sending them to private schools at public expense and transportation costs is really a cost avoidance strategy.
A cost avoidance or cost reduction?
It's a cost avoidance. It's really about building a program so that we won't be placing future students out. I'm not comfortable, and Kevin and I have talked about this a great deal, and we talked about it at the board. The students who are currently in outplacements and stable there, I don't anticipate that we're going to be able to bring very many of them back without getting into legal battles with parents. And I don't think that's a good use of our resources at this point, because these kids have been unstable. And if you are a parent of a child who's had a period of instability, the chance of you risking that again is slim to none. So I'm not calling this a savings strategy or taking the guess that we'll be able to bring some students back. What I am anticipating is that if we do this well, students who are currently struggling won't need to go. They'll be able to stay with us because we'll have an opportunity for them here that we don't currently have.
So if you looked at the population, you've been here for a couple of years, but if you look at it back another couple of years before that, and you look at the needs that were new, that you had to outsource, and you're looking at this alternative program, and you looked at those specific students, how many of those would not have potentially been outsourced?
Had we been
Had you
able
had this
to
in place?
capture
Just trying to
and
think of, how do you do the modeling to say, over the next 3 years, we expect to have X number of students with some, variance in probability there. But realistically, if you had X number over the past 5 years and that held steady, you'd expect to have whatever the number is that you keep here versus sitting away, which I would think is a big benefit to a lot of the parents too, to not have their children shift. Obviously, economically, it's a better thing too.
I reviewed each of the students who are currently outplaced, whether I was part of the outplacement or not. So I went back into the record a little bit about when they were outplaced. Most of the students currently outplaced were outplaced somewhere between 7th grade and 10th grade, which is how we came up with a 7 through 12 model. Most of them struggled significantly at the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade level. That transition to high school was very difficult. So building this model, God bless you, building this model to capture that, to allow those kids, when the struggle didn't have to reach a crisis, I think we would have saved, I won't say all, but probably about 70% of the current number of students outplaced at this type of school. Remember that not every student outplace attends the kind of, it's not of the profile we're talking about here. So we would probably have saved 22 students from being outplaced at $70,000 a year plus transportation.
22 out of how many?
Right now we have over 30 who are outplaced. but not all of them are students who would fit this profile. They're in different kinds of programs.
So I'm sorry, bringing them in-house under this program would be an equivalent cost, just more local, or it would be a lower cost per?
Fully realized, this program would only cost slightly above the per pupil expenditure of the typical student. So it would be about a $30,000 a year, fully subscribed. So would
Versus
be
7,200.
less than half,
So,
far less than half, and you would save in the transportation zone. And I think almost more importantly, I know you're the Board of Finance, but more importantly, we would save kids and families from a series of crisis years. And I think that would save the community as well.
Andrea, I see in the budget for private tuition that this next year you're gonna save around $400,000. It's gonna be that much less. But then each succeeding year, the private tuition cost goes up around $500,000, so it's $1 million higher.
Well,
How does
private,
that fit in with the alternative school?
Again, I didn't do a great deal of future years because I need to see this, we need to see this in vivo to make sure that it's actually gonna be, realize the cost savings.
And the alternative school hasn't been approved yet by the board.
And the alternate school hasn't been approved yet. So that tuition number, if we don't do an alternative program, then that tuition number becomes more volatile.
I'm sorry, this board needs to approve that, or are
The
you talking about
Board
the
of
state?
Education.
The Board of
The Board of
Education needs to
Education.
approve.
Right, so it wouldn't be appropriate
So
to
those numbers, the
factor in.
400,000 down. and
Those will be
above is not relevant to the.
The 400,000 down is more, is something else. It's more related to, we have a couple of very high-cost students who are graduating and leaving the district, and then we have some other adjustments related to the excess cost provision. So those two numbers are not about this.
So going forward, if this is in place, does a parent or a student have the choice of going outside the district, or is their only choice the alternative high school? Or who makes that decision?
Our model for the alternative high school is really a school of choice model. We want students to buy into the programming, so we have to build a model that meets their needs. As with any other placement related to special education, the parents have the right to due process if they feel that the program is inappropriate. And again, the PPT team, the team that makes decisions, that includes the parent and the staff, need to provide the appropriate program for a student. This will not preclude all-out placement. There will be some students who continue to need a higher level of care than even this can provide. And so that part of the continuum of special ed services will always be there for those students who require that. But this will meet a large number of the kids on that list right now. When I reviewed and looked at their profile, and I look at them, and we've invited some of those parents to participate on our advisory board to help us build this, because their kids, even if their kids never benefit from it, they know who their kids were at this time, so they can be really good advisors to us to make sure we build it to meet that need.
So just for the sake of clarity, the head count relating to the alternative high school is already built into the projections, or it's not built in?
It's proposed in the operating budget.
So it is in the operating budget?
Correct.
Okay. And so the cost associated with the head count is already in the operating budget?
Right,
But,
about 400,000.
but in terms of what is in the actual budget for the alternative high school, besides the personnel, any other cost or savings, those are not in there. You've got a baseline of current operating.
Yes, for the tuition, I did not build in a savings of X number of students because those students are there and stable. I didn't build up more students, so the risk is if we don't build in the alternative program, we don't have a cushion in the tuition line for students who might be struggling now, who over the next course of the year may require a higher level of care than our current continuum of services can provide.
A question, just out of curiosity, this due process, process that you speak of, just, how does that take place? Is it a third party that the state appoints, or?
The state hires,
I'm sorry?
So we have an
Well,
hour.
and I don't wanna take up a lot of time, but
once
it's a
again,
really
I invite you
important
all to
question.
come on in. I can give you special ed 101. A due process hearing, there's a team of attorneys who are appointed by the State Department of Education to conduct hearings in the
they're
special education
regionalized,
realm.
or,
No, there's a group of, I think there are 10 or 12 that are contracted by the state, and they rotate through based on the hearing. And they would come down to Wilton and take testimony under oath, review the evidence, and review whether or not the program offered by the district holds the burden of proof. I'm sure you've heard burden of proof discussions. So we would have to prove that the program we've offered is appropriate under the statute. And that can take anywhere between, the last hearing I was involved in took 12 full days. We had to, the district had to put up about 14 different staff members to testify. So we had to prepare those staff members for testimony. So the legal fees associated to win that hearing were about $175,000. The district I was in at the time did win that hearing, but almost the day after winning the hearing, we were in another PPT with the family. So it's a difficult process. You don't go to due process often. Sometimes, it's available to people and you go, but you don't go often. You try to resolve issues at the lowest possible level, because you have to maintain a relationship with families.
Have you had any feedback from the advocates that are out there as well, that are a big piece of the equation here, that are looking at this and saying, we really think this is a good thing and can help us?
On our advisory committee, we've also invited 2 local advocates to participate.
Yeah, I just, for the record, because Andrea was very kind in describing due process, Connecticut is one of a small handful of states where the districts are assigned the burden of proof, and because of the high cost of due process, it creates a disincentive to actually, even when you think you have a good case, because the law is so wishy-washy, your best chance is 50-50. And so there's a real financial calculus, set aside all of the other really important humane considerations. And so what happens is districts often default to mediating. And so we find ourselves in situations where we're giving away far more than, and oftentimes outplacing kids to programs that we don't believe in at all, because we know we could do a better job locally. And so this is something, we ran up the tree with the state legislature a couple of years ago. There's no appetite in the state at all to overturn. It's actually a state board guideline, not a law. But there's no interest. So
I would also say in the world of cost avoidance, having a program like this that we can, even if we propose the program and the parent disagrees and requests a mediation, having a program like this built with this level of care gives us a better opportunity to mediate a lower cost, even to settle the case. So it is having a continuum of services is having a very rich and deep bench, so to speak, in your continuum of services in special ed will help you avoid costs, even if there is a legal part of you, a parent chooses to participate in one of the legal dispute resolution processes afforded to them. So going into a situation like that with an IEP that is truly individually designed to meet that child's needs gives us a better way to negotiate that settlement agreement, even if you go into a settlement agreement.
One last question. Is the school responsible for the plaintiff's law fees?
If we go to a due process hearing and lose,
So it's-
or it's a split decision. Sometimes you get a kind of a Solomonic decision, a little bit here and a little bit there. The parent then can file in federal court to have all of their legal fees paid for by the district.
Right.
If you lose outright, then you pay their legal fees, yes.
Have we sent students to Utah, South Carolina, or Montana?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow.
On
So-
a daily basis?
No. But when, if a student, the reason I add that here is we have increasing numbers of kids who need this kind of service. And because we are not alone, all of our neighboring districts, we are vying for spots in private day schools. Because we're vying for spots, they don't always have them. When they don't have a spot available and you cannot find a school for a student who requires this level of care, you can't give them less. You have to give them more. And often that is a residential treatment center. And those residential treatment centers aren't here. They're in Utah, South Carolina, Georgia, Montana. And when you send a student to those, you are also required to pay for their transportation costs to get there. And if their parents have obligatory family work that needs to happen, you fly their parents out and pay for their lodging. So it is, again, it is cost effective and cost avoidant to have a rich, developed program. It's not free. It's not free.
Yeah.
But it is cost avoidance to build a quality program here in town, and to serve the needs of our students here.
Just so I understand the definition of private school, are we talking private schools within the Fairfield County area? You said that you compete for spots there. So is this like New Canaan Country School, St. Luke's?
No,
or
these are private, special education,
Thank you.
therapeutic day schools.
Got it.
This isn't,
Understood.
private secondary school.
Got it.
These are therapeutic, special education schools.
I see.
So if we stay on the numbers, which is our responsibility, and just on the back of the napkin, if you have 22 that are outplaced at 70 plus 20 in transportation, let's say just a third of those over time, it's not going to happen overnight, wind up adopting this and seeing this as a better solution, this is more than self-financing or beyond break even. I'm just thinking about, at roughly what numbers there on average, not recognize not everybody's exactly the same, but just so we can think about, what does the throughput take for it to make sense on the cost avoidance that you're talking about. So it doesn't take all 22
It
to get
doesn't
you
take
there,
all 22 to
right?
get you there.
Roughly a third of that actually winds up being positive.
I also think over time, there are other things happening in the district. An earlier question was about some of the other cost avoidance strategies. Some of the social and emotional learning work we're doing, some of the work that you've supported over time in interventionists and coaches, and the training and professional learning in some of the other areas. All of those things enrich the continuum of services to meet the needs of a broader array of kids. This is just an area that we see a real need in, and an emerging need across Fairfield County and other districts. This is the next big deal in special education, are these kinds of kids.
So the Board of Ed hasn't completed their evaluation.
We're scheduled to vote on it next Thursday night. Same night we approve the budget.
Do you ever see this a situation where you might be taking kids from other districts?
One of the questions here was, have you talked to other districts?
I
And,
apologize, but I don't have this question.
Oh.
Or any of the answers,
There you go.
so,
Thanks.
thank you.
I did speak with New Canaan and Darien have both begun a program. They're both in year 1 or 2 of implementation. They're both already realizing some cost savings. They weren't prepared to give me hard numbers, but they were estimating right now by year's end, they would have saved close to $200,000 in their first year of operation. That's where they're estimating right now based on their current population.
And
Westport is currently evaluating.
So
we
we used to have a
Right.
program with Westport, and in the conversations Andrea's had with her counterpart, I've had with mine, the interest right now is really from Westport, Weston, and Easton Reading. And
Does Weston have a program like this?
No.
But they're interested. But Westport has its own issues right now that they're facing, and some leadership transition in my area, so they weren't prepared to dive in right now. They've got a lot on their plate in Westport right now. And then Weston is also in a leadership transition phase. So they're very interested, and we've been talking about how we can partner together, whether it is accepting students on a tuition basis to offset further cost, or in future years partnering to have a shared kind of cooperative program that we all pay into. We've talked about that. They just weren't prepared to go at this point.
Andrea, are you prepared to find and hire the kind of faculty that you need for this? And it sounds to me like those folks are pretty highly sought after at this point, and you're gonna have to pay top dollar for them.
Well, I am optimistic and confident that we may have some teachers here in district who are interested in helping to build something like this. This is for a creative and energetic teacher. This is an exciting opportunity to get in on the ground floor of building something. Often we join schools that are already built around us. This is an opportunity to really build a program from the ground floor up. So I would anticipate, having met many of the teachers of Wilton, that we might have some folks internal to the district right now who would be excited to join this journey and to help us build something really tremendous.
Right, and to your point about salary, they'd be governed by our salary contract.
The teacher's contract would do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next question was a question about preschool and preschool tuition. So that's question 7. In 2017-18, we had approximately 31 peers and collected 190,600. In 18-19, we have about 34 peers. We expect to collect 233,000, and we've collected 181 of that. For 2020, we're anticipating about $250,000. This year, the board voted to raise tuition, so that's where you see the difference. So the question 8 was about the projections for 21 and 22. And you're right, we tune our FTE estimates annually. And so I'm always cautious about forecasting too far in advance what my own thinking is, because I have staff that pay very close attention. And oftentimes the first thing they say when I say, do we need that position, is you're trying to cut jobs. But if you go back to my previous comments around enrollment and some of the work we're trying to do, you can get a sense of what the opportunities are for staffing. And then just similarly for question 9, Anne can speak to this because she was more intimately involved in the process, but I think we try to forecast pretty conservatively. And I guess the only other piece I would add is we now have I think a very good 5-year operating capital plan, which we didn't have in the past. We reviewed that at Business Operations recently, and also with the Board of Ed. And so we have some significant maintenance costs that have been deferred for years, and we need to address those. So the operating capital makes up quite a bit of that forecasted increase.
In the development of that.
He has. Yeah, Chris and Jose have actually been responsible for it. They've developed both a 5-year operating capital as well as a 5-year operating capital plan.
But you can do forecasts without putting in FTEs.
Well, we're assuming
Just
flat,
putting
but
numbers in, that's what the selectmen do.
yeah, fair enough. Question 10 was an enrollment question, and I took it to mean, how comfortable are we with NESDEC? And I'll say, I look at the NESDEC projections very carefully. I also look at we had back in 2017 and then in 2016, Milo and McBroom run projections. And the pattern across the Milo and McBroom sets as well as the NESDEC sets was similar in that they under-projected enrollment at the elementary school and over-projected really at the high school. In the most recent round of projections, we knew, we had some skepticism about the projections in 4th or 5th grade, and that's because we saw a spike 2 years ago that we didn't account for. You may recall we wound up opening an additional class. So when NESDEC reran the projections, they ran that as a constant. Given the cohort size, I thought it was skeptical. So what we did in this last budgeting cycle was include an extra $100,000 in salary, but we didn't create a class because we didn't think that number was going to bear out. It didn't. So what you had at Miller Driscoll was essentially in the projection an extra 31 kids that never materialized. We were never sure that they were going to. On the other side, at the high school, if you again look both at Mylone and NESDEC projections, they do factor in a cohort decline from 8th to 9th and 9th to 10th in this most recent year. And if you look deeper into the questions, you can see that 4 or 5 year history. The decline was just steeper than they anticipated, and certainly than we anticipated. And, you know, we got some questions about that. I think there was some fear or concern that people were leaving the high school, or kids were leaving the high school because of the programming. So we surveyed, we chose the students who were sophomores because they were already there at the high school for a year. And what we found was there's really no pattern. We had a number of families move out of town. And so of the families that stayed in town but moved their kids to private schools, the reasons varied. If there was categorically a majority of reasons, I think it was athletics. We had a couple families put their kids in private school so their sons could play hockey. Another kid was a skier and didn't make our ski team last year. We had 2 families who were uncomfortable with the what they reported as a shift of instruction. They didn't like more group-centered work. So that was the reason that they acknowledged. And then we had a couple of families who say, you know, they've got more than one kid in the system, and the high school is great for one child, but not great for the other, so they put the other child in a different school.
But is there a trend there that you're seeing, acceleration?
It's hard to say. You know, there are a couple of things that I looked at. So if you kind of scroll forward here, question 16, you know, gives you the total number of kids beginning in 12-13 that have left for private school. And you can see, you know, I guess if there was a trend, I don't even know if you could say it's a rising trend, because while we had 51 in 12-13, there was 49 in 16-17. 17-18 was certainly a high in the last 6 or 7 years. So we'll have to see. We had a number of freshmen this year send their boys to Fairfield
Are
Prep.
these principally at the high school level, or?
It's really where we see the loss is 9th and 10th grade, and so you can see there's kind of an historic pattern that's pretty clear. And this year it was just the number was bigger. So we'll see where we are another year from now, and adjust accordingly.
When the year's over, do you go back and check the projections to who actually showed up and see whether there's a systematic under or over projection?
You know, I look at them, and so I have right now, I can send it to you if you're interested in looking at it. It's all of the projections against the October 1 for the last 3 years. And the pattern is what I described before, under projected at K1, 2, and then over projected primarily 9-10. So, I really don't know how
And
else
do
to
they
account for
correct,
that.
or do you have to correct here if you've got an anomaly? Because their numbers are just coming off of some kind of general numbers.
Yeah, well, they base their projections going forward on our October 1 actuals. And we do see, we see, quite a bit of variance over the course of the year. So I think we might have taken on 20 new students beginning in January, and maybe lost 7 or 8. So there is variability. I guess, if the question is, am I confident in NESDEC? I would say they were no worse than my loan. I was very confident in my loan. And so I'm wondering, just about the market and the volatility of people coming and going right now.
Because I remember the old days of Esmond, that she was able to do real tight, at least from what we could tell, is tight projections, and when you back check them.
Yeah, she reset her numbers every year. I mean, she was, that was a wonderful service that she provided the board.
Yeah, her 1 year out projections too were actually pretty tight. I recall that, and I just wondered why we ever moved away from her.
Well,
in the first place.
I think her business started to grow, and so she, this is going back now 3 or 4 years, and she called me and just said she wasn't able to, continue to provide the service.
It's too bad, she was good. Okay.
So that was questions 7, 8, 9, and 10. Question 11 was, that was really staff benefits, so I don't know if there's similar. Yeah. So, question 12 is an enrollment question. So with respect to the justification of flat staffing, or, in this case, increasing staffing, I think you've heard now the arguments for the staffing. We have what I would consider enrollment-sensitive staffing, and then other staff types that are stepped away from enrollment. So in previous years, we leveraged the enrollment decline to add staff members like math and reading interventionists, instructional coaches, library and media specialists, and those all conform to our programming priorities. And in this more recent year, we've added staff to special services, with the hope that we can insource the work and, ultimately drive down the tuition line.
Instructional coaches was a concept introduced 3 years ago, roughly. Is there a point at which that tapers off? I mean, teachers need constant instruction, or is that something that we could expect to be
It's a good,
Following
let me defer to Chuck, and then I'll weigh in with my own
The
2
question
cents.
presumes that we have a stable staff. We have to remember that our staff come and go quite a bit. Maria, maybe you could help me. How many new teachers do we hire every year?
Around 30 in the
Around
past
30
several
new
years.
teachers. Curriculum is constantly being revised and updated, so I don't see, at least in the foreseeable future, any opportunities to decrease that particular part of our staffing.
Yeah, I guess that you have to see what they're doing to appreciate the value of their work. And when you're kind of on the outside looking in, it can be hard to understand. I would say here in the state of Connecticut, maybe first with the kind of advent of the accountability movement, and then with the introduction of Common Core standards, teaching and learning is a completely different ballgame. And what we're asking teachers to do today is far different than what we were asking teachers to do even 10 years ago. So despite the fact that we get, very good and well-qualified students from some of the sending universities like UConn, which has a wonderful teaching program, they still have an incredibly steep learning curve. And then, as Chuck mentioned, as we're constantly revising curriculum, they require a level of support.
I also think that in the spirit of continuous improvement, everybody has an opportunity to get better. Andrea just whispered in my ear, Tom Brady still has a coach, right? So
Even the best of the best, getting good feedback is good.
So, and I think, I think, again, from my office, we look at those positions as investments in the rest of our staff, and I think we're on very solid ground when you go into the research on instructional improvement and, what are the best leveraged strategies. Embedded instructional coaching from people who are working in the classroom side by side, far and away, is the most leveraged strategy. So if we're looking to grow our scores and to be a district here in the DIRG that, is at the top in achievement, but in the bottom in terms of per pupil spending, this would be the strategy I would continue to bank on.
Kevin, can I just add, I just want to say that when you sit at the board table, you can have presentations made to you and teachers can come and talk to you, and there's only so much you can absorb or understand about what's really going on. It's not until you actually step foot in the school and observe it. I know John has made that trip, and I think Richard Creeth had before, but I'm not sure, but I know John has for sure. To truly understand a coaching session, you have to actually witness one. You would be amazed at what's happening there, and I think you would have a whole different thought process around that. So I know it's been said many times before, but the invitation is always open for any of you gentlemen to come and spend a day, half a day, an hour, and we can pair you up with the appropriate people and show you firsthand what's happening. And as Andrea even said earlier, her door's always open. Come in, sit down, she'll give you a quick SPED 101 lesson. So I just wanted to extend that invitation to all of you again.
Thank you.
Great. So, question 13 was just about the gift that the benefits line was, and what I would offer is this. In the 5 years that I've served as superintendent, this is my 5th budget. It's a 1.35% proposal last year, with some reductions with 1.6. The year before that was 0. The year before that was 0.77, and my first year was 1.98. We didn't have $1 million in savings in the benefits line every year of that 5-year span. So while it's absolutely because we set budget goals annually, we look at assumptions. Is it possible that next year I'll come forward with a 3% budget because that's what the needs are? It's absolutely possible, but what I would say to you is the assumptions that we carry forward in our budgeting process absolutely bear in mind, Jeff, what you started with, and that's all of those external concerns around the financial state of both the town and the state in general, and also an understanding of the lack of revenue that we used to get. So all that's my way of saying is we make a lot of choices internally, and so I shared with Chris, it was last year, the first budget run started at like 8%. And that was, going through the process that we go through, working in each of the cost centers, people kind of laying out their priorities. And then we work through a process of rescission and make lots of hard decisions. And I think that's a good process because it allows us to kind of forecast a little bit into the future and to keep track of priorities, but also to make good choices. And I would say, in each of those budget cycles, we've gotten better as a district.
So last year, when we talked about this, there were a lot of things on the wish list, and among them you had your alternative high school, which you're addressing now. You had things like library books, which looks like the spending may have come down maybe because there are alternatives. There was deferred maintenance. Are there things that you're concerned are growing and will come back to roost at some point in time?
So, we get to this point of the year also, and we're, continue to scrutinize, spending in each of the cost centers. And if we see an area where, we might have had a program planned or, a professional learning experience that we didn't partake in, then we'll take a look at those dollars and we might reassign them to one of the other deferred priorities. At this point, in terms of the areas that are growing, I think we have a model in, technology expenditures that'll be stable over time, so I don't see that increasing. The contracted increase this year was a result of just staffing shift. We took them off our books, but, hired some replacements as part of that contract. I would expect in time to see even that number go down a little bit. We're looking at our library learning commons, again, in terms of the way that instruction is changing over time. That's going to be an area we want to continue to invest in. So while we've addressed Miller Driscoll, we are addressing Cider Mill this year. We didn't budget for Middlebrook, so that would be an area that is deferred at this point. We'll go back to the Wilton Ed Foundation and some other grant opportunities and see if we can't cover it that way. And then I would say, we can expect to see some funds in the next budget to address the high school learning commons as well. The question 15 was about administrator salaries, so the explanation is there.
14, shared services, other opportunities.
So there are, the opportunities are catch as catch can. I think the most reliable, and it's not necessarily a robust opportunity, is in the special services ride sharing that we participate with other districts. So I think we have a sharing arrangement, or we had one with Weston recently, maybe one with New Canaan. But those are dependent on the students, where they live, how much time they're going to spend in a van, where they're going, et cetera. Aside from working internally, we have not explored doing shared IT across towns or things like that. And I just learned very recently that there's a statute on the books that really gets in the way of that work right now. So while, a couple of our maybe well-intended senators had this idea that regionalization could yield savings, it's not going to. But setting that aside, Connecticut General Statute 158A does actually allow towns to enter into cooperative arrangements. So Andrea mentioned the concept before of maybe creating a shared sped school. The problem with that statute is while on the books it says you can do that, what it doesn't allow you to do is create a separate LEA in order to pool funds and to set a single per pupil. So in order to finance it,
LEA, I'm sorry.
local educational agency. So you have to run it as separate LEAs, whoever the kind of, two towns or 3 towns that would participate. So you have to back out all the costs in order to report accurately to the state to get your own individual excess cost sharing, et cetera. So without going into too many more details, the point is there's red tape in the way of that. So those are things that I think we'd be interested in doing, but we need a legislative solution.
How about
to-
procurement of supplies and things like that?
Yeah, and we participate in the state contracts wherever possible, and those have been in place. We've actually recommended to our state legislatures that they could be far more aggressive in trying to utilize the purchasing power of the state. So for example, you saw we spend a whole lot of money on our student database. That's a singleton contract, and Power School has, like contracts with 70% of the districts in the state. So if the state chose to take over that function, and they could because they require us to report to them, almost monthly, they could leverage the power of the state, probably lower the contract and save thousands of dollars for all kinds of districts. And we can think of a quick short list of other programs. Our Follett library program, every district I can think of uses the same system, but we all contract individually.
The IEP program that we
Right.
use is one that's used by most of the state, and the state could fund that.
Yeah, so we get some benefit of the state contract, but there's just money being left on the table.
Would it make sense to talk to our legislators about getting some easement on 158A? Because voluntary efforts is what we're trying to encourage, and why the state blocks that and forces us things that we don't want to do just
Right.
makes no sense at all.
Absolutely. In fact, I spent some time with Tom O'Day and Gail Aviel
Gail.
earlier today.
She's
And
on
so they're
education.
absolutely, this is where they are, and I think they're chomping at the bit to have a committee hearing on that topic so we can start to raise these
Is
kinds of
Tom
issues.
also in the education committee?
I don't think Tom's on education, but he's a great representative for Wilton. All right, so moving on to administrator salaries. The increase is, it's a function of the contract, and I think embedded within the contract is language that stipulates that by the last year of the contract, all the administrators move to the top step, so that's why you see that jump in this given year.
Wait, say that again?
It's the way that, it's just the way the contract is written. They don't-
Jump to the what?
The maximum. So they have a range,
Okay.
not like a step-in lane system, the way we do in the teacher's contract.
Okay.
So in the last year, there's a stipulation that pushes everybody
So
to
if
the
you looked
max.
at the past 3 years and you averaged it, it wouldn't be that 3, 4?
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm. Correct.
It looked like it was just increasing from last year's comparison.
No.
Thanks.
Question 16, that was a question about just students leaving for private school, so you can see those numbers there.
I think it's important to mention there, Charlie, that when they leave for private school, the parents still pay the property taxes.
Yeah.
So our question has always been to these parents, why are you paying double? And why are you spending $40,000 a year at St. Luke's and still paying the full boat property-wise here? And the one thing that is interesting, that the children that often go out and go to these schools could potentially fall into another arena that, if they stayed here, that would cost us a great deal more than if they were just here. Because many of them go for needs, or go for special situations, or special needs that they have. To private school, the parents are doing on their own, and not looking to us to deal with, which is interesting. So, and then we have, because there's just no other explanation. We're going to see a big movement at the end of this year from Middlebrook in 8th grade to Fairfield Prep. I think it will be 14 or 16 kids this year. 9 went last year, and the talk is right now that maybe 14. It has nothing to do with us. You know, it isn't that we're not working, not delivering what we're supposed to be delivering, or not, that we're not fulfilling our commitments. There are a variety of reasons why they go to prep.
So you do formal
Okay.
exit interviews or something to
Yeah,
gather that
we,
data?
we haven't, but as a result of the change this year,
And the questions that
we're
were
gonna start
raised, we started
surveying.
to, yeah.
We know where they go, we don't necessarily know why they go,
Yeah.
but we're implementing a
Yeah,
survey this year.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's good feedback, right?
And they go,
It
you
is.
know, I mean, we have dear friends whose son last year went from 8th to prep. His younger brother this year, coming up, will go from 8th to prep. He
I'm
and
sorry, Fairfield, bro?
Fairfield Prep, he and all 7 of his brothers went to prep, okay? It's a family thing.
Right.
It has nothing to do with us, nothing to do with the fact that we're not delivering what we promise or providing. It's totally different, it has no reflection on our system at all, which is always a concern of mine, and we've talked about it a number of times at the board level. You know, we need to understand why families are doing
Yeah.
this. Dear friend last week I spoke to, their son will probably go from Middlebrook to a private school here because he needs that environment. He needs that 10 kids in a classroom environment.
Okay, let's move on.
Right, so question 17, athletic participation in student parking fees. According to Dr. O'Donnell, all parking fees and 100% of the fees for the fall and winter sports have been collected.
I did have a related question to that.
Sure.
If I look at participation fees, you're budgeting, and you're saying for this year, 120, flat number for next year. Yet I look at the number of students served, 1285 times the $125, and you come up with about 161,000. So that's a pretty big delta between just simple math, and I understand that at some point there's a cap, but that still doesn't explain that difference. That number looks too round. And,
And do you want to speak to
yeah,
that?
40,000 is still 40,000.
Yeah, I'll have to go back into it.
I just have to check, because the numbers we have on the children that are in the program are bringing us to that number. So that's why we do it, and then it's broken up between insurance and where the fee actually goes. So I'd have to look back into the enrollment of the program itself, because we were doing it the cost of, the 125. So I would actually have to check into that number again.
Okay. It just looked too round.
Sure. And then question 18 was about the New World accounting. So just the timeline, when
Yeah, the
would it
timeline.
roll out?
So, we're in the throes of it right now. Financials are gonna go up by, July 1st. We were hoping to get the HR up by July 1st as well, but, with the different complexities of getting the HR up plus, or the payroll up, I should say, the payroll up, it's probably gonna be January 2020, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. One, we're on 2 different EIN numbers, so we're actually gonna combine the EIN numbers, which will actually make it more efficient for us for tax purposes, IRS purposes, things like that. And then, with dealing with W-2s and all the requirements for the end of the year, to do it mid-year, you're supplying, 2 different W-2s for employees, you're supplying 2 different 1095Cs for employees. So it's not a good process to do it mid-year, from a payroll perspective, from keeping everything clean. So we've just finalized the chart of accounts, which will go in front of, Chuck and Kevin, to make sure that they're okay with how we've set it up and the way they want it from a reporting structure, to be able to move forward with the, financials. And then,
Has that chart of accounts been built such that you can do, you know, the kinds of analysis that is essential for understanding, you know, how many administrators you have? Well, it's got, ultimately, you're coming back to you, that's why I'm kind of looking at it.
Well, I haven't seen it yet,
No,
so
they haven't.
as we've
It's
talked
all in
about it
draft form.
conceptually,
Yeah, it's
this
all
is
in
what we've
draft
been
form
talking
for us.
about.
So now that we have what we're calling our bridge, this is what you had, this is where it's going
Right.
to, and here's what we can do. So, as you know, when I talk in the Board of Finance meeting, how manual, I have to give a shout out to Marianne Salvato. I'm sorry, I have to do it because of the work
Don't
that she
apologize.
does to, it's amazing. So I wouldn't be able to do what I do without Marianne. So the system will give us the ability to do actual, you know, FTE counts, salaries. We're breaking them down by the classifications that are currently there, which have been since broken down the last year or two, that we've done interventionists, we've done coaches. So that breakout is there. We can do it dollar-based, we can do it headcount-based. That's
That's the point.
where, we're- yeah,
But
that's where.
that's what I mean, we talked at the very beginning of this meeting about how you're getting savings as a result of littering these people across your payroll system rather than grouping them. This is about a 50% pickup in savings, if I heard you correctly, right?
In moving it to a different system?
No, you said instead of, you're saving pretty dramatically on healthcare costs.
Oh, yes,
And that was because you're able to litter them through the accounting system.
yes.
And thereby have better accuracy that you can feed to your insurance agency.
Yes,
That's self-funding, and those are the kinds of things I think you'll be able to get the benefit of by having this system. There'll be lots of other opportunities, I think, that come down the
I
pipe.
can't wait to see it.
Now, I mean, I know I sound like a geek being
Yeah.
excited
well,
about it, but
position
it's a
control,
very,
you know how that position control reports, things like
Yeah.
that, that's gonna be a great tool.
Yeah.
That's gonna be a great tool for
How'd
us.
you wind up with 2 EINs?
It's just,
That's,
some school
I think,
systems do it, some
very
towns-
common
yeah,
practice, yeah.
It is a common one, I've worked in other districts that it's only under one, so it's just a preference of how they were set up originally.
And, you know, the way the law is written probably promotes
Probably the governance of it is separate,
Right,
yeah. but-
because boards of ed, you know, there's a firewall in the law about who, you know, who's responsible for schools.
Right.
No, I don't know that that's the answer, but I suspect that's probably the answer.
And the only difference is it's really your filing of your payroll taxes and things like that. It's not like a corporate difference with the EIN because there's no real major difference. Then it's gonna streamline again a process of one person doing all the tax reporting with backup as opposed to having two systems doing it on two different 941, you know, all the whole thing that goes with that.
so just as this last question here, which is, you know, because the one deadline has been missed, and
Yeah.
I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but I think we all can appreciate the benefits once we get in that system. So I want to make sure that the school is cognizant of if Ann gets overwhelmed and her team gets overwhelmed, that there's a, you know, a willingness to get her the resources. Because as she points out,
Sure.
You miss a payroll deadline, you got to wait till the next year.
Right.
And a lot of those savings go out the window for the
Yeah, I would put that, I mean, is there a willingness?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there's
there-
definitely a willingness.
Yes.
She's a one-arm paper hanger.
No, Kevin and I have talked about the whole moving forward and making sure it, and, New World, we've made sure that we actually got their best consultant. So we have her literally for the next year she's coming in again, next week. And she's seen, and the reason why we wanted this particular person is because she was in school district side. She was in a town side. She knows that side of the business versus being just a software consultant. So now being on the software consultant side, she knows the best way. So things we might think of, this is how we want it, well, it may not be the best way from a reporting structure and how we want to set it up. So, we made sure we got her, so,
Good to hear.
yep.
Great. I had just two other questions that were about conferences, and I'll take you through very quickly. I think the question was, it came from the SPED report, and I think the general sense was, are we sending people off to warm weather conferences? The answer is periodically, yes, but not as a routine practice. So there were two conferences in question. One was in Orlando. That was an assistive technology conference, and we sent one of our, I think Michelle is a speech and language pathologist here in the district, but she serves as our assistive technology specialist. So she works with kids who have special needs, does inventories with them, and then tries to match appropriate technology so they can fully access the curriculum. Our thinking there is rather than hire another dedicated assistive technology person, we're up-training our existing staff to, have that flexible capacity. So the second conference was a special education legal issues conference, and that was attended by Andrea and the assistant director, Sharon. They went last year, and I think maybe the year before that, they went last year and are going this year. Again, I would say the same thing. You have to go to participate. That's where you learn all of the legal trends across the country. You network with your like counterparts. Are there potentially other ways to do that? Potentially, but we're certainly. I think one of the questions was about online learning, and I would say yes. We are very well aware of all the different opportunities and take advantage of them for providing our staff with learning. In terms of policies that govern oversight, we do have a policy and a regulation around staff travel. It's fairly generic, and it's been, I don't even recall off the top of my head when it was adopted, 1980. It was reviewed last in 2012. And it assigns me, a great deal of discretion to review and approve or not, and then to assign, reimbursement for those conferences. And so that's not a charge I take lightly.
Can I ask a question? It's really going back to 16 and trying to reconcile with this very last page on the handout. And it shows the number of students leaving Wilton in 2018 is 84, and I'm trying to understand how that relates to, there's no key here. What does 17.9 mean for Wilton?
What are you looking at?
It's this thing?
Oh, so.
Are they related at all, or is this something?
You know what, so this chart, I should have put a label on it. This was produced by the EdSite database. So that's the State of Connecticut Education Department database that now, I think it's 2 years old, which enables users, they've been aggregating all kinds of learning data, demographic data. So in the 2018 report, they actually included by town a percent of student population that goes to private school. And so I think at the time the question was asked, I just generated this graph. So this is the percentage of students in town, according to the EdSite database, that go to some school other than our public school. And you have and this is...
But it's not people who have left our school.
No. This is the percent enrolled in private school.
17.9% of the students in Wilton are in private school.
Right, and so even, so it's the 2018 report, you have to know the data's probably at least 2 years old.
Right, okay.
And I offer this really for comparison purposes, just so you can get that look across the DIRG. Right, does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Probably not.
Are there any other questions?
I have one more question. I think the town has benefited greatly by the work that Ann has done. You saw it firsthand, the finance side. I think you've seen it as well.
Absolutely.
Do you have the right size staff and structure to support everything that you've put in place here as, town is separate, that's Board of Selectmen, but here in the Wilton Public Schools to run the business side of the equation?
I've thought about that because there is a lot going on. The way I would see it, I don't think we need more headcount. We're looking towards to try and get both offices into the same location, because I think that would help a lot with coverage and people learning different things, development, yeah. What the crunch is because we're doing so many changes at one time. So relying then on the consultants to do it. So the New World consultants to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the conversion for us. I have to do policies and procedures on both sides. I've contracted with a third-party firm to actually do that, to help us.
Things that are project-oriented,
Yes,
non-recurring.
right. So once that's up and running to where I think we should be on both sides, then we're on the stable path. So I don't think we need additional staff. I just think we need those consultants to get us to that path. And then we have the staff that have the guidelines of how to do it, the proper procedures in place for us. And then it's a matter of then I have the time and other people have the time to train the staff to develop them. If there's opportunities, if someone leaves, there's opportunities for the staff to move and feel that they have a progression.
Thank you.
I actually have a question. So you said that every month you're sending a lot of information up to the state in terms of data,
Maybe not quite monthly, but very routinely.
but my question is, are you able to get information back that's helpful to you?
Well, Dr. Smith, how shall I answer that question?
No.
So it would, that's my question, is it a two-way street? Are you getting what you need back? Because I've heard this
We have not
across
gotten
the
what we've
board.
needed from the state of Connecticut in all the years I've served as a superintendent, and probably the years I served as a principal, so that's now more than 10.
The issue, it's not timely. They're always about 2 years
I
behind,
know.
so.
And listen,
data you
no
can get is 2
disrespect
years old.
to our friends at the state ed department, you know, as Connecticut has struggled financially, that's been one of the departments that's been, taken the brunt of the cuts, so you can't find people up there to answer your questions, and they are, you know, I think a shell of what they might have been, 15, 20, 25 years ago. It's a compliance organization, certainly not a, public school support agency any longer.
Well, just so you don't feel badly, the same thing's happening in social services, so.
But it makes it that much more galling when there's a proposal
Oh,
to
you know it.
consolidate school
Yeah,
districts.
exactly.
when
Let
there's-
us do it for you.
And as you
Yeah.
You do such a good
Right.
job everywhere else.
Galling
And
is
there's
a good
so
word.
much that can be done at the statewide level. I mean, even the ledger implementation, everything Ann's doing could have been done at a statewide level, could have been presented, here's the tool, here's a chart of accounts, and everyone could customize it to their, and all of this could have been done, and the negotiate, all the elements that you mentioned, it just is, it really is galling that they would come in and make a proposal like that without looking at the top level, everything they could be doing to add value to all of our local school
Yeah,
systems.
I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, no, and I, like, for myself, I appreciate everything that the board is, the school board's done, and Dr. Smith, and everything you all have done in terms of pulling this enormous effort together. You know, I would give kudos to everyone that's been involved in this, and we're all with you on the non-consolidation of all the districts.
Thank you.
One question that's not.
I feel the same way, and I just want to say that I'm really pleased with the 1.35% budget. And in the one budget session that I sat in on to see how the board worked and what the board's understanding of this budget was really impressed with the quality of the questions and how thoroughly you grilled the superintendent. So I appreciated that a great deal. I have one complaint about tonight's meeting, and that is that you've held it on Valentine's Day. And here you
Trying to incent a short meeting.
have all
all
these
strategy.
red
Next year
meat
Super Bowl Sunday.
Board of Finance people here ready to show their fangs. And it's a difficult night, but you've placated us a little bit with your gift. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucille.
I want to take advantage of, not a budget question, but something I know that you've been debating at the board. That's the idea of the carryover fund. Is that still something that you're considering doing? It seemed to have gone down.
Certainly, I mean, we haven't discussed it in, probably since we started budget deliberations, but it's very much on the table for concern. I got some great feedback from Lynn Vanderslice, probably back in December about it, but we haven't come back to the
We
business
haven't
operations
scheduled,
committee.
it's not on our calendar right now.
You have a recommendation?
In advance of that, I was calling around to the other Board of Finance chairs and seeing what they're doing. Darien's not doing anything because they don't want to do things outside of the RTM. Westport has implemented it and have been very pleased and sent me their two-page agreement that they have with the Board of Ed. I can forward that on. Ridgefield knew about it, but wasn't doing anything, almost passive, and I haven't heard back from Weston or New Canaan. But the people at Westport were extremely enthusiastic about it, sets the right incentives, and we've done it, and it's worked well for the past 2 years, I think they've used it, so.
I think, Jeff, just to give you an insight, over the last 4 years, if we had it, the total of the savings, or what would have been applied to for this, and we finally got the numbers that you sent me, that you did. Over the last 4 years, the total is $170,000. It's not huge dollars that we're talking about.
No, but it's something.
Yeah, it is
It's
something,
something. It's
but it's not as though we're
really-
saying it would be $1 million a year. or
Okay,
something.
well,
No,
Over
understood.
4 years.
that's a discussion for another
That's
time.
understood, yeah.
Is there anything else?
No, and I also thank the board for the presentation this year is very good and all the effort you put into it as well. I think that's it from our side, so.
Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved.
Your
Second.
motion to adjourn here?
Second. All in favor? All right, well, the Board of Education is adjourned.
8:56.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Happy Valentine's Day.
See you all soon.
Happy Valentine's Day.